Welcome to this discussion of primitive reflexes sponsored by Health Builders, where our name is what we do best. There appears to be so much general confusion about primitive reflexes, what they are and how they work. Many psychologists and childhood development experts, as well as other so-called authorities, believe that each of these primitive reflexes should be extinguished at a particular milestone of a child's development. For example, the asymmetric tonic neck reflex has its first display at about 1 month postnatal and is said to be extinguished between the 4th and 6th month of age, and that it's wrong for this reflex to persist past this point. And if it does persist, it represents an upper motor neuron disorder. However, if these reflexes were to actually disappear, there'd be all sorts of functional holes in the human neurologic fabric that would represent the signs and symptoms of other problems. There are several functional movement patterns known as primitive reflexes. For example, besides the tonic neck reflexes, there are flexor withdrawal reflex, crossed chord reflex, the gallant reflex, and several others. Today, we'll discuss the primitive reflex known as the asymmetric tonic neck reflex, or the ATNR. We'll describe how to prove that they persist even in the adult, actually being integrated with more mature presentations without ever being extinguished. We'll discuss how to recognize their pathologic display and how to reintegrate their integrity if and when they become pathological. Hello, I'm Dr. Michael Allen. I'm the founder of Health Builders and author of the 2 books, What Your Brain Might Say If It Could Speak for the General Public, and Receptor-Based Solutions, Functional Neurology Every Doctor Should Know for doctors of all types. I have over 40 years of clinical experience as a functional neurologist, licensed both as a doctor of chiropractic and a doctor of naturopathic medicine. I specialize in bringing neurologic order from dysfunction and chaos by using manual muscle testing as functional neurology. Let me tell you more about how we do this using the ATNRs as an example. A middle-aged woman who suffered from some serious balance issues recently asked me when she could return to her usual exercise program. She had been complaining of instability with various body movements and was afraid of falling. While she has developed greater stability since starting the modified treatment and exercise program that's consistent with her individual postural display, she only wants to go back to her former exercise routine if she's ready. So she asked me, how do I know when I'm ready? I told her that we'll know she's ready when her nervous system responds predictably to our functional neurologic tests. Let's step back for a moment. When it comes to an individual rehabilitation exercise routine, I reflect back on the number of needless athletic injuries that happen in any given season. It becomes particularly obvious when I watch athletes all doing the same warm-up exercises. My son and I enjoy going to and watching spring training baseball games in Tempe, Arizona every year. We often arrive at the stadium early in the morning to watch the players go through their warm-up routines. It strikes me that there are 6 possible postures that a person can take on, 7 if you count the neutral posture, and a person can take on any one or a combination of these postures. There can be too much flexion, too much extension, right lateral bending, too much left lateral bending. Then there are the more complicated right foot forward and left foot forward gait patterns. Each of these 6 postures relates to the cerebellum, while the last 2 also have to do with the thalamus. Each of these postures represents a whole body display. You see, the human nervous system doesn't think in terms of individual muscles. Rather, there are intricate collections of muscles that must work together to perform any given task. We call these collections homologous columns, or a collection of like pathways that function as a unit. When one part fires, the whole column must fire. Despolopoulos and Silberange, in their Color Atlas of Physiology, state that, quote, with few exceptions, all activities of the central nervous system, receiving, processing, and integrating information, ultimately finds its expression in contraction of a muscle, unquote. In fact, simply standing up against gravity requires a complicated and finely tuned symphony of muscle performance, or else we would all just collapse. Here's the point. If 6 players, each with their own individual posture, do the same warm-ups, 5 out of 6 of them will probably be exercising themselves right into their pathologic posture unless they know how to do things differently, unless their trainer understands the significance of their individual postures. But how do they know unless somebody tells them? Since each of these 6 groups represents a different posture, there are specific exercises for each of these groups to do for their warm-up. And the period of warm-up and the period of cool down are as important as the exercise itself. Here's a very important fact. Blood always flows toward the muscles that have an initial demand. A corollary to this fact is that it takes time for blood to move from the internal organs during rest to the periphery upon demand. This initial demand is only at the start of an exercise routine or an athletic activity, but it may take as much as 10 to 15 minutes for a person's nervous system to slowly shunt the blood from their gut to the muscles that have increased demand for oxygen and other nutrients. That's what warm-up is all about. Eventually, the warm-up is complete when all the muscles' demands are satisfied, no matter what their movement may be. One group of these athletes should do one series of exercise specific to their posture, while each of the other groups of athletes should do their own completely different series of exercises. They each have their own individual series of exercises. Once the athletes are warm, it's proper for the whole team to come back together again and do the same activities. Their muscles have the blood they need and their joints are warm, ready for action. Let's consider how a specific group of muscles responds to a very common and inborn movement pattern, the ATNR. The movements consistent with the ATNRs are an excellent example of where blood should flow, but it often doesn't, relative to a warm-up routine. It's totally within the optimal human design for infants as well as adults that turning their head to the left causes an increased tone in the muscles of extension on the side toward head rotation and an increased tone in the muscles of flexion on the side opposite head rotation. This is often referred to as the archer's posture. This simple movement pattern can be appreciated through the application of manual muscle testing. Any muscle test of an extensor or flexor should follow these same rules. Remember we said that the human nervous system moves in terms of whole body actions, not relative to individual muscles? Well, this upper body movement is the normal and expected reaction when a person turns their head to the left. It's functional and it's neurological. It's functional neurophysiology. We say that these normal movement patterns are reciprocal because when one muscle contracts, another muscle that does the opposite activity on the same side relaxes, so the first muscle can do its job of contracting. Let's dig a bit deeper into these patterns. To extend your left arm, your left triceps muscle must contract, and your left biceps muscle must simultaneously relax, allowing the left triceps to do its job of contracting to extend your left elbow. Likewise, when your right arm flexes, it can only do so when the opposite activity happens on the same arm. That is, your right biceps must contract while your right triceps muscle simultaneously relaxes, allowing your right biceps muscle to contract, flexing your right elbow. Further, and staying with our example, when a person's neck muscles work together to turn their head to the left, all the receptors from the neck muscles and their associated spinal joints inform the brain that the head went to the left. Conversely, when the person's neck muscles and spinal joints work together to turn their head to the right, that motion stimulates other receptors that cause the nerves to fire, informing the brain that their head went to the right. These reflexes are not muscle reflexes, but rather they're reflexes that take place inside the spinal cord. These signals to the cord eventually make their way to the brain. And by the way, these signals are totally unconscious. We say that this normal movement is coupled. Coupled movement informs the brain about skilled, purposeful, and originally designed spinal motion. These presentations mimic the fencer's posture. When the neck muscles turn their head to the left, properly and reciprocally increasing the tone in the appropriate flexor and extensor muscles of the upper extremities, blood flows to the muscles according to their individual demand. The left extensors are nourished with the blood they need to perform useful work, and the right flexors are similarly nourished. This is what warm-up is all about, moving blood with its oxygen and other nutrients to the muscles upon their demand in order for them to perform useful work. However, we often find people with dysfunctional and uncoupled ATNRs. These quite common yet pathological movement patterns are all too familiar in clinical practice, but they often go unrecognized because the examiner doesn't know how to realize their display. Just because a muscle facilitates during a manual muscle test does not mean that that muscle is functioning according to its original design. It may be inappropriately facilitated relative to the applied primitive reflex. Any doctor who suggests otherwise may understand the reflex's clinical sequelae, but not its functional origins, so they look at the symptoms and often apply a fix that does not address neurologic reality. When abnormal sensory input, that is, that input that's inconsistent with the nervous system's original design, reaches the cord, it causes neurological chaos, which eventually reaches the brain and causes disarray there also. As a result, the brain is unable to do its job of managing the muscles in a manner consistent with pre-programmed joint stability. Let me give you an example. It's not unusual for a person to display an increased tone in the flexor muscles on the side toward head rotation and an increased tone in the extensor muscles on the side opposite head rotation. This is backwards. This is Disrecipria, an uncoupling of reciprocal patterns. It's an other than human movement display. At this point, let me tell you a story. I was discussing ATNRs with a doctor from the National Institute of Health when I demonstrated the pathological or uncoupled movement pattern, and then I used the term other than human. He immediately stopped me to ask, what is an other than human movement pattern? We reviewed all the issues related to the breakdown of the originally programmed input and output pathways, and you could see his brain explode. He thought for a moment and said, "You've definitely touched on an issue that's unnatural and inappropriate relative to normal human brain function. That definitely needs to be addressed and fixed in any person who wants to have a healthy brain and a pain-free body." When you have movement error, your brain instinctively recognizes the inappropriate and chaotic pattern, but survival is the key, so your nervous system instantly makes all kinds of adaptations in order to perform the task as best it can. But because of all the compromises, that modified task is itself full of confusion and adaptation. That only leads to more sensory chaos. In the meantime, all the associated whole body patterns that should support the movement according to the pre-designed physiology are also compromised, and the structure deteriorates in the muscles and joints. But your brain will not let you realize it because this dysfunction is often painless. While the dysfunctional ATNR pattern does not immediately hinder a person's activities, it's nonetheless pathological. It's discoupled. It's not human. As I mentioned, these abnormal muscle and joint patterns give their own sensory input to the brain, but they are inconsistent with the originally designed human movement patterns. Since these proper and inborn neurologic patterns are intricately knit into the human neuronal fabric, the discoupled sensory input wrongly informs the brain that the head went one direction when in fact it went the other way. Over a long period, this dysrecipria causes repeated microtrauma to the muscles and joints, eventually leading to muscle fatigue, joint instability, and an increased probability of injury with the perception of pain. Further, these abnormal signals build their own integrity while the coupled patterns, which are left unstimulated, are sacrificed and sculpted away. And the normal functional design decays at the expense of disuse, creating more dysfunction and pain. No wonder sports injuries are so common. Let's talk for a moment about pain. Pain is a personal, private, and emotional experience that's unrelated to the amount of tissue damage. Pain doesn't manifest itself until it's consciously recognized in the cerebral cortex, in your brain. Until then, it's properly called nociception. Everyone has nociception all the time, but it should be kept under control by the signals that arise from the largest diameter neurons called proprioceptors. Nociceptive signals are among the slowest in the human nervous system. That is, their signal travels at about half a meter per second, or about 18 inches in a second, while the proprioceptive signals are the fastest at about 120 meters per second. That's greater than the length of an American football field in 1 second. Normally, when nociceptive signals compete with the proprioceptive signals at the entrance to the spinal cord, the proprioceptive signals, being the fastest, block the nociceptive signals from going any further, and there's no perception of pain. However, consider that a person who's 6 feet tall or 72 inches jams their toe in the leg of a chair. They would know it happened right away because of the proprioceptive input, but it would take a couple of seconds for the barrage of pain to register in their brain. The trauma uncouples the proprioceptive signals, allowing the uncontested nociceptive signals to enter the cord and travel straight to the emotional parts of the brain that provide conscious recognition. And that's when we say, ouch, you knowingly realize pain. The goal of treating any dysfunctional ATNR display is to rehabilitate the coupled patterns and sacrifice the pathological ones. These abnormal postures must be reversed. We must sacrifice the discoupling and rebuild the coupled movements. This is one reason moving a traumatized joint helps ease the pain. Staying with the example of ATNRs, let me suggest one rehabilitation exercise to reestablish the coupled patterns. While standing, the patient should start with their arms at their sides and their head straight ahead. For a discoupled left ATNR, have the patient all at once and slowly turn their head to the left while simultaneously raising their arms to shoulder height, and at the same time extend their left upper extremity and flex their right upper extremity. This should be done in one slow and smooth movement. Coming back to the starting position must be done one by one. In other words, have the patient lower their left arm, return their head to the center, and then lower their right arm. This return to neutral is just a suggestion because it can be done any way the patient likes. And since this exercise can tend to be boring after a few minutes, the return could be done randomly, but it must be done one by one in order to sacrifice the pathological posture which we're trying to erase. If we're rehabilitating a right ATNR pattern, just reverse the movement. Have the patient slowly turn their head to the right while simultaneously lifting their arms to shoulder height, and at the same time, extend their right upper extremity and flex their left upper extremity. Again, they could come back to the starting position any way they like, but again, do it slowly. This rehabilitated pattern should be done regularly, the duration of the exercise being determined by the doctor. These exercises are meant to be aerobic, so besides doing it slowly, be sure to always stop short of any sense of muscle burn and definitely stop if there's any pain. When the patient's joints are warm, and if their examination shows that their joint motion is both reciprocal and coupled, they should be able to exercise in any way they like to maintain their joint stability. In other words, when their joint motion has functional integrity, the pathways have their optimal stimulation. That's when the muscle is moving according to its original design. Their muscles and joints are warm, and their brain is being stimulated properly. A patient with ATNR issues should always continue their rehabilitation therapies until their movement patterns are consistent with that which would be expected for each turn of their head. In summary, there is much more to rehabilitation of the ATNRs than just the upper extremities, but this beginning procedure will help the doctor know where to start. I'm available to help doctors learn more about diagnosing and treating and rehabilitating this and other movement patterns. There are so many ways to address these various primitive reflexes. The treatment opportunities make each case exciting and practice fun again. You can learn more about the ATNRs and many other primitive reflexes in my book, Receptor-Based Solutions, Functional Neurology Every Doctor Should Know, at www.receptorbasedsolutions.com. You can contact me at allenchiropractic@cox.net or call me at my office, 949-855-9629, if you so desire. Insofar as my patient was concerned, I was able to release her to her regular and symmetric exercise routine with the instructions that she should warm up as directed for the time that we determined was appropriate for her situation. So often, athletes overtrain their muscles by warming up improperly for their posture and end up encouraging pathologic movement patterns without even knowing it. The trick is helping them understand the pitfalls of their pathology and getting them to participate in the rehabilitation of their pathologic posture or postures. Imagine what it would be like if your joints moved according to their original design. The secret is catching any dysfunction before it becomes your new normal. That is, stopping pathology before it gains a strong foothold. Let me tell you one of my favorite patient stories that involves a 6-year swimming rivalry. A few years back, while I was teaching about these reflex patterns to a group of doctors in England, I was asked to work on a specific swimmer to help him break his streak of losses to the same person. The frustration was tangible prior to the final race of the swimmer's career, but at the sound of the starter's pistol, my patient of one visit was able to get off the starting blocks first and never look back. He easily swam his way to his prized gold medal, and the crowd went wild. A follow-up to the story, this same young man recently swam the English Channel. While the average solo crossing time is 13.5 hours, my patient did it in just over 11 hours, a tremendous accomplishment. The difference between a World Series ring and being one of the other teams that ends up watching the World Series from the comfort of their own television, or winning a prized gold medal instead of getting another silver medal to add to your long collection of runner-up memories, may depend on the functional performance of the ATNRs in specific and their relationship to the musculoskeletal system in general. So, coupled ATNRs are very important when it comes to human performance, when it comes to brain function, when it comes to joint stability. Let me help you understand how to check and treat this very important primitive reflex when you start working on your next patients on your next clinical day. I love helping other doctors learn to use this and so many other primitive reflexes properly in their practice. This is the practical application of some simple neurologic principles by using manual muscle testing as functional neurology. There are some openings for new doctors in the Health Builders Clinical Mastermind Group. If you're interested in learning more about building your practice using manual muscle testing as functional neurology, please contact me at blackbeltnak@gmail.com. Let's get down to business and examine each patient using physiologic applications to normalize their performance and change our patients' brains and their lives one at a time. If you like what you've heard, be sure to subscribe to these videos and click the bell so that you can learn more about how to use manual muscle testing as functional neurology. I'm Dr. Michael Allen. It's my goal to bring neurologic order from dysfunction and chaos by teaching brain-based solutions with you in mind. Thanks for paying such close attention, and I'll see you at the next video. Stay well.